I mean, here's the great paradox of our age. Free trade has lifted the human race to a level of health and wealth and happiness previously unimaginable. And yet, bizarrely, the system that has done it has never been more out of fashion. If I think of the changes just in my lifetime, I was born in 1971. In the year that I was born, in the United Kingdom, the average worker had to work for more than a month to buy a television set. Today, that figure is less than 2 days. The year that I was born, 1971, a stationary car emitted more pollution than a car moving at full speed today. It's the miracle of the market. The year that I was born, 1971, fewer than half of girls in the world completed primary education. Now it's more than 90%. And that has happened as countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, have joined the nexus of global markets. In 1990, according to the United Nations, 38% of human beings lived in extreme poverty, defined by the UN as an income of $1 a day or less, at 1990 prices. Today, that figure has fallen to just over 8%. And the sharpest falls have been in those parts of the world that have moved from autarky to open markets. And yet, despite this extraordinary success story, idealistic people, well-meaning altruistic young people, are protesting G7 meetings, marching against trade deals, occupying stock exchanges, genuinely believing that in doing so, they're standing up for the poor against the evil corporates. In fact, of course, they're doing exactly the opposite. Nobody stands to gain more from distortions and quotas and regulations than the big multinationals. And nobody stands to gain more from their removal than the poorest people in the poorest countries. I can't believe that we're incapable of winning this argument. Here's the problem. I don't think we can win it only in terms of pointing to the advantages for consumers. I mean, it is perfectly true that free trade has brought us much cheaper devices, right? But that doesn't have much moral force or appeal to the kind of people who are occupying Wall Street. I think we need to find a way of selling free trade as the ultimate instrument of poverty alleviation, of conflict resolution, and of social justice. Nothing has made the human race freer than the specialized free exchange of goods. It's the defining characteristic of humanity. As the sage of Kirkcaldy, Adam Smith, said, no one ever saw a dog make a fair and deliberate exchange of one bone for another with another dog. Right? The ability to do that is what distinguishes the human race. 10,000 years ago, our remote ancestors discovered farming. They worked out that if you put seeds in the ground, crops would grow in that place. And I'm afraid it took about 5 minutes for them to make a second discovery, which is that it's, in terms of the ratio of cost to outcome, of effort to reward, it's much easier to nick somebody else's crop than to spend all year cultivating your own. And then about 5 minutes after that, they made a second discovery, which is if you can regularize the plunder, if you can get a gang of people to do it for you in a semi-orchestrated and official way, that's the best ratio of all. And so civilization was born as a form of organized looting. And that, broadly, is how it stayed for most of the next 10,000 years. In terms of the structure of the state, one of those Iron Age empires was not so very different from a medieval European monarchy or a modern African kleptocracy. A handful of people would get into power, rig the rules so as to have the organized looting of the state for their benefit and that of their children, until the miracle of the discovery of a system that elevated the rules above the ruler, that allowed individuals to interact one with another, not on the basis of birth or caste or tradition, but as autonomous citizens, able to make contracts freely on a case-by-case basis. And that breakthrough, wherever it was practiced, led not only to more freedom and more wealth, but actually to more cooperation. I mean, the greatest irony in all this is, I mean, how many times have you been told by lefty friends that capitalism makes us more selfish, right? That free markets make us atomized and individual. I mean, I'm guessing you all have lefty friends because we're in Washington, D.C., right? Exactly the opposite is true. It's when you have to buy and sell that you're forced into a position of empathy. You have to put yourself in the shoes of your potential customer. And you begin to look at the world through somebody else's eyes. And it was the spread of markets that led to the cultural shift from the warrior societies that up until then had predominated to the ones that we have now, which create space for the individual. And gradually, as wealth spread, history stopped being just the story of the top 1% of the top 1%, while everybody else labored from dawn to dusk in fields. And we started to move towards a modern society, and that was the miracle of the markets. You know, it's the most natural thing to take for granted what's familiar to us. We don't stop and see the wonder of what's around us. But if we're not able to win that argument, then we're all in the wrong line of work. Of course, then your lefty friends, your many lefty friends in this city will come back and say, well, all right, even if we concede that free markets are efficient, even if we're prepared to allow that it's a better system of allocating resource than anything else that's so far been tried, surely you must accept that they're soulless, that the getting of wealth can't compete with the really important things like playing with your kids or listening to Beethoven or going for a nice walk in the countryside. Well, this obviously needs saying when you're talking to your lefty friends. I mean, I shouldn't need to say it to you guys, but I spend a lot of my time with some really very conservative people, and I've yet to meet anyone who thinks that you get more pleasure from a large bank balance than you do from listening to Beethoven or playing with your kids or going for a walk in the countryside. But again, think of how the market has transformed living standards. Why is it that we can now do those things? It's because you can afford a dishwasher and you don't have to spend all your time doing the washing up that you can go for that nice walk in the country. It's because you can now drive to work instead of taking 6 different buses and trams that you have time to listen to the Beethoven. It's because you no longer have to work dawn to dusk 7 days a week just to feed your kids that you can take the weekend off and play with them. That's the miracle of the market. The strangest paradox about this is that up until now, until very recently, free trade was the ultimate radical cause. Go back 100 years or 200 years, the kinds of people who favored open markets were generally the kind of people who favored limiting the power of monarchies and ending the privileges of the church and spreading meritocracy and opportunity to the masses. What a bizarre thing that in this generation, free trade is now somehow seen as an exploitative mechanism for wealthy people in wealthy countries to hurt poor people in poor countries. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. How do we win that argument most of all? Well, here's the thing. You just do it. Once you've opened your markets, nobody ever looks back. So far, only quite small countries have done this. Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand. You go and ask people in those countries, nobody now wants to go back to regulation, to import controls, or to the various tariffs and quotas that they used to have. It was contentious at the time. In New Zealand, there were huge rows about taking subsidies away from farmers. Literally nobody now is arguing that they should go back to a statist and interventionist model. Those countries have all benefited immensely. All of them now have overtaken the United Kingdom easily in terms of GDP per head. Singapore has twice the per capita income that we have because they've invited the traffic and commerce of the world there without conditions. Britain now has the opportunity to be the first G7 economy to do something similar. When Hong Kong does this, it's great news for Hong Kong. But when the 5th largest economy on the planet does it, it's potentially transformative for everyone. We have the opportunity to open our markets across the board, including in the traditionally tricky fields like food and textiles. Nothing will do more to raise living standards in developing countries. And the best of it is that instead of coming at a cost to our taxpayers, it will come at huge benefit to our consumers. And the biggest benefits will be felt by the poorest consumers who have to devote the highest percentage of their income to the basic commodities that are subject to EU tariffs and quotas.